You have 15 hours to leave. I said it like I was reading from a grocery list.
Calm.
Measured. Like I was asking someone to pass the salt instead of ending a lifetime of pretending. The fork in my mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth. My father's wine glass hovered in the air. And Sienna, golden, perfect Sienna, her smile cracked just enough that I could see the person underneath the performance. The dining room went silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that happens right before a window shatters. My mother recovered first. She always did. What did you just say? Her voice was small, wounded, like I'd slapped her in front of company. She expected tears. Or yelling. Maybe an apology wrapped in shame. She didn't expect a deadline. You heard me, I said. 15 hours. Pack what you need and be gone by morning. The chandelier above us threw shadows across the table, making everyone look like strangers. Which, if I'm being honest, they kind of were. You can live with people your whole life and never really know them. You can share blood and holidays and a last name and still be completely alone. My father set his glass down carefully, like he was defusing a bomb. Rowan, you're being dramatic. No, I interrupted. I'm being clear. Have you ever been pushed so far that silence becomes sharper than screaming? If you have, you know exactly what I felt in that moment. Hit that like button, because what comes next proves that sometimes the quietest words cut the deepest. Sienna's practiced smile was back in place, but her eyes gave her away. There are other things you could do for us, she said, her voice light as air. Dangerous as a blade wrapped in silk. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. But let me back up. Because that dinner didn't start with me giving orders. It started with them giving me one. The same order they'd been giving me for years, just dressed up different each time. It's your duty to pay for her wedding, my mother had said earlier, folding her napkin like she was folding up my future. You need to contribute to the family. If you won't, she paused, making sure I felt every word, disappear from here forever.
Duty.
That word had been used against me like a weapon my entire life. Duty meant empty your bank account. Duty meant smile while they took. Duty meant let them treat you like an ATM with a heartbeat. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. While they planned Sienna's picture-perfect wedding, the one that would cost more than most people make in 5 years, I'd been doing something else. I'd been reading, learning, digging through old files in the study when everyone was asleep. I'd been teaching myself how to see the truth hiding behind the marble floors and designer curtains. The Vale estate looked like money. Old money. The kind that came with portraits of dead relatives and furniture you weren't allowed to sit on. But I'd learned something important. Looking rich and being rich are two completely different things. My grandmother Arlette taught me that. Not with words, she was too smart for that. She taught me by showing me where to look. Before she died, she held my hand during a Thanksgiving when everyone else was worried about the table settings and she whispered, "You're good at seeing things." I didn't understand then, but I do now. When I stood up from that dinner table, I already knew every secret they'd tried to hide. I knew about the mortgages stacked like dominoes. The loans taken out in shell company names. The credit cards maxed out to maintain an image that was crumbling from the inside. I knew the family fortune was built on borrowed time and borrowed money. And I knew exactly how to make it all come crashing down. Would you stay quiet and keep playing their game? Or would you finally draw the line? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear what you would have done. Growing up in the Vale house felt like living in a museum where you were both the visitor and the exhibit. Everything had a place. Every smile had a purpose. Every conversation was a performance with an invisible audience keeping score. My mother, Beatrice, moved through rooms like she was gliding across a stage. My father, Hector, collected achievements the way other people collected stamps, displaying them where everyone could see. And then there was Sienna.
Perfect Sienna.
She never spilled anything at the country club. Never said the wrong thing at fundraisers. She could walk into a room full of strangers and within 10 minutes have them eating out of her hand. She'd been trained for this life the way athletes train for the Olympics. Every gesture calculated. Every laugh timed perfectly. I was different. While Sienna practiced her smile in the mirror, I was reading contracts in the study. While she learned which fork to use at formal dinners, I was learning how to spot a bad investment. I worked at a charity bookstore, fixed things around the house when they broke, and asked questions nobody else seemed interested in asking. Like why we had 3 mortgages on a house that was supposed to be paid off decades ago. The family treated me like I was useful, but not valuable. A tool, not a treasure. They'd pat my head and hand me their problems to solve, then go back to discussing things that actually mattered to them, like which photographer would make Sienna look best in natural light. My grandmother, Arlette, was the only one who saw me differently. She was sharp in a way that made people uncomfortable. During one Thanksgiving, she fainted right there in the dining room. Everyone panicked and scattered, talking about calling doctors and canceling dessert. But I stayed. I held her hand while the paramedics checked her oxygen levels. She squeezed my fingers and looked at me with these clear, knowing eyes. "You look tired," she said, "but you're good at seeing things." At the time, I thought she meant I was observant. Later, I realized she meant something deeper. She'd seen what I was becoming, someone who noticed the cracks in the foundation while everyone else admired the paint. After she died, there was a letter. The lawyer handed it to me during the reading of the will, and my parents looked annoyed that she'd left me anything at all. The letter was short,
Cryptic.
It said she'd always admired people who were useful rather than decorative, and that she hoped I'd remember that when it mattered most. I read that line over and over until the paper went soft at the edges. The house felt different after she was gone. Emptier. Like someone had removed the only honest thing in it. My parents barely mourned. They were too busy planning the next gala, the next photo opportunity, the next chance to prove the Vale name still meant something. But I kept that letter, folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of an old book on my shelf. Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I'd take it out and read it again. Useful, not decorative. It felt like a secret message, a permission slip to be something other than what they wanted. I started paying closer attention after that. Not just to what people said, but to what they didn't say. To the phone calls my father took in his office with the door closed. To the way my mother's smile would tighten when the credit card declined at lunch. To the vendors who'd call asking about overdue payments. The Vale family looked perfect on the outside. But perfect costs money. And we were running out. One night, I found an old filing cabinet in the basement that nobody had touched in years. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, and letters from creditors that made my stomach drop. The house wasn't just mortgaged, it was drowning. The fortune everyone thought we had was mostly smoke and mirrors, held together by credit lines and desperate refinancing. I sat on the cold basement floor with those papers spread around me like evidence at a crime scene, and I understood something my grandmother had been trying to tell me. Wealth without honesty is just a prettier kind of poverty. When I climbed back upstairs that night, Sienna was in the hallway, fresh from some charity event, still wearing her perfect smile. "Where were you?" she asked, not because she cared, but because she'd noticed I wasn't around to do something she needed. "Just reading," I said. She laughed. "You and your books. You should come out more. Meet people. You'll never find anyone hiding in dusty rooms." I smiled back at her, but inside, I was thinking about the papers in the basement, about loans and interest rates and the ticking clock of financial collapse. And I was thinking about how none of them had any idea what was coming. Because the night before my grandmother's funeral, I'd found something else. Another envelope, tucked into that same old book where I kept her letter. This one had my name on it in her handwriting, and inside was a single sentence that changed everything. "When they finally show you who they are, you'll know what to do." Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed how you saw everything? Let me know in the comments. The funeral was small, tasteful, exactly the kind of event my family specialized in, just enough emotion to look genuine, not enough to be messy. I stood in the back while people gave speeches about how wonderful my grandmother had been. Most of them were lying. They'd barely known her. But they showed up because that's what you do in circles like ours. You perform grief the same way you perform success. After everyone left, I went to her old room. It still smelled like her, lavender and old books and something else I couldn't name.
Peace, maybe.
The furniture was covered in white sheets now, like ghosts of the life she'd lived. I sat at her desk and pulled out that cryptic letter again. Be useful, not decorative. When they finally show you who they are, you'll know what to do. But what exactly did that mean? The answer came 3 days later, when my mother called me into the dining room. The whole family was there, my father in his expensive suit, Sienna glowing like she'd just won something, and my mother with that tight smile she wore when she was about to ask for money. We need to discuss something important, my mother began, folding her hands like she was chairing a board meeting. Sienna's engaged. I looked at my sister. She held up her left hand, showing off a ring that probably cost more than a car. Isn't it beautiful? She said, her voice sugary sweet. Congratulations, I said, because that's what you're supposed to say. My father leaned back in his chair. We're planning something special. The kind of wedding people will remember. That's when I felt it, the trap closing in. This wasn't an announcement. It was a setup. Of course, something like this requires significant investment, my mother continued. The venue, the flowers, the photographer, everything has to be perfect. The veil name means something, and this wedding will reflect that. Sienna's smile never wavered. It's going to be amazing. We're thinking a week of events. Maybe even get it featured in a magazine. A week of events. Magazine coverage. 6-figure budgets disguised as family obligation. We'll all contribute, my father said, and his eyes landed on me. Family is about supporting each other. There it was. The ask wrapped in expectation. They didn't want my opinion or my help with planning. They wanted my bank account. I'd been the family's backup plan for years. When my father's investment went south, I'd helped cover it. When Sienna needed tuition money for a program she never finished, I'd paid. When the property taxes came due and the checking account was empty, guess who got the call? Every time, they'd use the same word.
Duty.
I can help with logistics, I offered. Vendor contracts, seating charts, that kind of thing. My mother's smile froze. We have a wedding planner for that. Then what do you need from me? The temperature in the room dropped. My father set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. Your contribution. Financial contribution. This is a family event, Rowan. I felt something shift inside me, like a door I'd been holding closed finally swinging open. I can't do that. Sienna's laugh was sharp. Can't or won't? Does it matter? My mother's face went tight. After everything this family has done for you. Like what? I interrupted. What exactly has this family done for me? The silence that followed was dangerous. My father stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't be ungrateful. We've given you a home, and education opportunities that you've asked me to pay back 100 times over. Sienna leaned forward, her perfect mask slipping just a little. You're being selfish. I'm being honest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother's letter, about the papers in the basement, about the way my family looked at me, not like a person, but like a resource they were entitled to extract from. So I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I called a lawyer. Not the family lawyer, someone independent. Someone who wouldn't report back to my parents. I explained the situation carefully. The mortgages. The loans. The way the family had been living beyond their means for years. Who holds a title to the house? The lawyer asked. It's complicated. My grandmother's estate. Was the will fully settled? I paused. I thought so. Sometimes estates have provisions. Conditions. You should request a full copy of the will, not just the summary.
I did.
And 3 days later, sitting in a coffee shop far from home, I read through 40 pages of legal language that made my head hurt. But on page 37, I found something that made my heart race. A codicil. A conditional clause that nobody had mentioned. It said that if the primary heirs were found to be financially irresponsible or engaged in public scandal, a trustee could reassign estate assets to protect their long-term value. My grandmother had known. She'd seen this coming years before I did. She'd built in a failsafe. I also found something else, paperwork from a year ago that I'd barely remembered signing. My grandmother had given me limited power of attorney over certain household affairs. I'd thought it was just for emergencies, in case she got sick. But reading it now, I realized it was more than that. It gave me leverage. That night, I made a list. Not a revenge list, a protection list. What would need to happen to trigger that codicil? What steps would make the trustee take notice? A financial audit. Code violations. Evidence of fiscal mismanagement. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was trying to stop the bleeding before there was nothing left to save. When I got home, Sienna was in the kitchen eating yogurt like she didn't have a care in the world. "Hey," she said casually. "Did you think about what we discussed?" I did. And I looked at her, really looked at her. At the designer clothes bought on credit. At the engagement ring financed by a family drowning in debt. At the smile that never reached her eyes. "I found something interesting today," I said. "In Grandma's will." Her spoon paused. "What do you mean?" "Just something she left. Instructions, I guess you could call them." Sienna's face didn't change, but I saw her shoulders tense. "What kind of instructions?" I smiled. The same polite, empty smile she'd been giving me for years. "Nothing you need to worry about. Yet." That night, I started making calls. To an inspector I'd met through the bookstore. To the bank that held 2 of our mortgages. To vendors who'd been stiffed on deposits. I wasn't being cruel. I was being careful. Grandma had said I was good at seeing things. Now it was time to make sure everyone else saw them too. If you found out your family's wealth was fake, would you expose it or protect the lie? Comment below. The wedding planning meetings felt like hostage negotiations where I was both the hostage and the ransom. They happened every Sunday in the formal dining room, the one with the chandelier that cost more than most people's cars. My mother would lay out fabric samples and flower catalogs like battle plans. My father would nod approvingly at price quotes that made my stomach turn. And Sienna would sit at the head of the table like a queen holding court. I attended because not attending would have been worse. But I watched everything with new eyes now. Every expense. Every decision. Every moment they treated money like it was infinite. "We're thinking white roses," my mother announced one Sunday, flipping through a portfolio. "Thousands of them. Imported." "From where?" I asked. "Ecuador. The wedding planner says they're the best." "How much?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Does it matter? This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. It matters if we can't afford it." The room went still. My father lowered his newspaper. Sienna stopped scrolling on her phone. My mother's smile turned to ice. "We can afford it," she said slowly, like she was explaining something to a child. "Can we? Because I've seen the bank statements." My father stood up. "That's private financial information that I have access to," I finished. "Grandma made sure of that." Sienna's voice was sweet poison. "Are you spying on us now?" "I'm protecting us. There's a difference." My mother slammed her hand on the table, and the fabric samples jumped. "This wedding is happening, Rowan. With or without your support. But it would be better for everyone if you contributed." There it was again. That word. Contribute. Like I owed them something. Like my existence was a debt I could never fully repay. "I already told you, I can help with logistics. I can negotiate with vendors, review contracts." "We don't need a bookkeeper," Sienna interrupted. "We need a sister who shows up for family." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to tell them exactly what I thought of their definition of family. But I'd learned something from my grandmother. Silence is sharper than shouting. "Fine," I said quietly. "Do what you want." But I had no intention of funding their fantasy. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched them dive deeper into debt with smiles on their faces. They booked a venue that required a $50,000 deposit. They hired a photographer whose portfolio included actual celebrities. They ordered custom invitations on paper, so thick you could use it as armor. And they did it all on credit cards that were already maxed out, using loans that would take decades to repay. I kept my own records. Every expense. Every vendor. Every promise made to people who expected to be paid. I wasn't gathering evidence to hurt them. I was gathering evidence to save them from themselves.
But they didn't see it that way.
One afternoon, my mother cornered me in the hallway. "People are asking questions," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "What kind of questions?"
About you.
"About why you're not excited for your sister's wedding. About why you're being difficult." I almost laughed. "I'm difficult because I won't bankrupt myself for Instagram photos? You're difficult because you've always been difficult. Ever since you were a child, you've made everything harder than it needs to be." The words hit like a slap. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Rowan. You learn to do what's necessary for the people you love. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've always been more interested in your books and your little projects than in being part of this family. She walked away before I could respond. But her words stayed with me, echoing in the empty hallway. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had always been on the outside looking in. Maybe I'd never really belonged. Or maybe they'd never let me. That night, I pulled out the documents I'd been collecting. Bank statements, loan agreements, credit card bills, the paper trail of a family living a lie. And tucked between them was my grandmother's letter, the edges soft from being read so many times. Be useful, not decorative. I'd been trying to be useful my entire life. Fixing their problems,
Covering their mistakes.
smoothing over their scandals. But useful wasn't the same as valued. Useful just meant I was a tool they could use and then put away. The next Sunday, the meeting was different. My father brought his lawyer friend, a man in a suit so expensive it could have paid for a semester of college. They talked about family contributions like they were discussing charity donations, not demands. "In families like ours," the lawyer said smoothly, "everyone participates in major events. It's tradition. And if someone doesn't want to participate?" I asked. He smiled. "Then we'd have to question their commitment to the family." It was a threat disguised as advice. They were boxing me in, making it clear that refusal meant exile. But what they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to my own lawyer. The one who'd helped me understand my grandmother's will. The one who'd explained exactly what that codicil meant and how it could be activated. "You'd need evidence of mismanagement," he'd told me. "And you'd need to report it to the trustee. But if the trustee agrees there's cause for concern, they have the authority to intervene." I had the evidence. Months of it. And I had the contact information for the trustee, a firm my grandmother had trusted, one that specialized in protecting estates from being stripped by careless heirs. All I needed was the courage to make the call. That courage came 2 nights later at another dinner. We were eating in tense silence when my mother made her final play. "We need a number," she said, not looking at me. "How much can you contribute?" "I already told you. A number, Rowan." Her voice cracked like thunder. "Stop playing games. Stop acting like you're above this family. You've benefited from everything we've built, and now it's time to give back." My father joined in. "If you can't support your sister, then maybe you don't belong at this table." Sienna's smile was pure performance. "It's okay if you can't afford it. We understand. Not everyone can keep up." The condescension was suffocating. They'd backed me into a corner and were waiting for me to break.
To cry. To apologize.
To open my wallet and make everything go away. Instead, I stood up. "You're right," I said calmly. "Not everyone can keep up with a lifestyle funded by loans they can't repay. But I've learned something you haven't. When you build your life on borrowed money and borrowed time, eventually someone comes to collect." My mother's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a single piece of paper from my pocket. It was a notice from the bank, one I'd received as co-signer on one of the property loans. A notice of default. "This came yesterday," I said, placing it on the table. "The house is in foreclosure. Unless someone pays what's owed in the next 30 days, we lose everything." The room erupted. My father grabbed the paper, his hands shaking. My mother started shouting about mistakes and errors. Sienna's perfect mask finally shattered, her voice rising into something close to panic. But I just stood there, calm as deep water. Because I'd already made the call to the trustee that morning. Would you warn them? Or would you let them fall? Drop your answer below. The explosion came exactly when I knew it would. At dinner, 3 nights after I'd shown them the foreclosure notice. They'd spent those 3 days in denial, making phone calls, talking to lawyers who told them what I'd already figured out. They were in too deep. The loans were real. The debts were stacking up. And the house they'd used as collateral for their lifestyle was about to be taken. But instead of accepting reality, they decided to attack me. "It's your duty to pay for her wedding," my mother screamed, slamming her hand on the table so hard the wine glasses jumped. Her face was red, her perfectly styled hair coming loose. "You need to contribute to the family. If you won't, disappear from here forever." My father was right behind her, his voice cold and sharp. "We've given you everything. Everything. And this is how you repay us? By standing back and watching this family fall apart." Sienna sat beside them, that familiar smile on her face. But this time it looked different. Desperate. Like she was holding onto the last pieces of a sinking ship. I looked at each of them carefully. These people who were supposed to love me.
Who were supposed to protect me.
And all I could see were strangers wearing familiar faces, demanding I set myself on fire to keep them warm. The candles flickered. The chandelier cast shadows that made everyone look like villains in a play. The smell of roasted chicken and lies filled the air. I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back, placed my napkin beside my plate with the kind of precision my mother had taught me at etiquette classes I never wanted to attend. And then I said the words that would change everything. "You have 15 hours to leave." The fork froze in my mother's hand. My father's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Even Sienna's performance cracked, her eyes going wide with genuine shock. "What did you just say?" My mother's voice was small now, wounded, like I'd struck her. "You heard me. 15 hours to leave. Pack whatever things you want to take, and be gone by morning." My father recovered first, standing up with his chest puffed out like he was about to deliver a speech. "You can't be serious. This is our home." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady as stone. "It's not. Not anymore." Sienna leaned forward, her perfect facade sliding back into place. "Rowan, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Let's talk about this." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." My mother's hands were shaking now. "You can't just kick us out. We're your family. This house belongs to all of us." "Actually," I said, pulling out a folder I'd tucked beside my chair, "it doesn't. Not legally. Not anymore." I placed the papers on the table. Documents from the trustee. Copies of my grandmother's codicil. Evidence of the family's financial mismanagement that I'd been quietly documenting for months. My father grabbed the papers, his face going from red to white as he read. "This is insane. You had no right." "I had every right. Grandma gave it to me. She knew what you were, what you'd do. She built in protections and I'm using them." The truth was settling over them like ash. My mother sank into her chair, her hand over her mouth. Sienna's smile was completely gone now, replaced by something raw and ugly. "You planned this," Sienna whispered. "You've been planning this the whole time." "No," I said. "I was trying to save us. But you wouldn't listen. You kept spending money we didn't have. Kept demanding I fund a fantasy, while the foundation crumbled. So yes, I made a choice. I chose to stop the bleeding before there was nothing left." My father was on his phone now, calling someone, probably his lawyer. My mother was crying, real tears this time, not the decorative kind she used at funerals. But I felt nothing except exhaustion. And maybe relief. 15 hours, I repeated. "I've arranged for the inspector to come tomorrow morning. The bank has been notified. The vendors you owe money to have been contacted. If you're here when they arrive, this gets much more complicated. For all of us." "You're destroying this family," my mother sobbed. "I'm saving what's left of it." Sienna stood up, her chair scraping loud against the floor. "You're going to regret this. When you're alone in this big empty house with nobody who loves you, you're going to realize what you've done." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'll be able to pay the electric bill." The next few hours were chaos. My father made dozens of calls that went nowhere. My mother locked herself in her room. Sienna started packing with violent efficiency, throwing things into suitcases like she was preparing for war. I sat in my grandmother's old study, surrounded by her books and her quiet wisdom, and I waited. At some point after midnight, my father appeared in the doorway. He looked older suddenly. Tired. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About the money?" "Months." "About what you really think of me?" "Years." He nodded slowly. "I never meant for it to be like this. But it is." He left without another word. By dawn, the driveway was filled with suitcases and boxes. My parents stood by their car, loading the last of their things. The house looked different in the early light, like it was waking up from a long sleep. Sienna was the last to leave. She walked over to where I stood on the porch, her face hard and beautiful and broken. "You think you've won," she said. "But you haven't. You're just alone now. And alone is worse than anything." "We'll see," I said. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone path like a countdown. I watched them drive away, 3 sets of taillights disappearing down the tree-lined street. And then I went back inside, closed the door, and stood in the sudden silence of a house that was finally, truly mine. My phone buzzed. A text from the trustee's office. "Inspector confirmed for 9 a.m. Bank representative at 10. Call when ready." I looked around at the empty rooms, the expensive furniture, the portraits of ancestors who'd probably been just as messed up as we were. And I thought about what my grandmother had written. Be useful, not decorative. The hardest part wasn't kicking them out. The hardest part was what came next, figuring out how to turn a monument to appearances into something that actually mattered. But I had 15 hours until the inspector arrived. 15 hours to prepare for the next chapter of whatever this was becoming. 15 hours until I'd find out if quiet justice was enough to rebuild what generations of lies had broken. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and doing what's right? Let me know what you would have done. The inspector arrived at exactly 9 in the morning, clipboard in hand and questions in his eyes. I'd met him before at the bookstore, a quiet man named Marcus who took his job seriously. He walked through the house like he was reading a book, turning pages with careful attention, checking the foundation, testing the electrical panels, making notes about things I'd already suspected were wrong. "How long has this pipe been leaking?" he asked in the basement, pointing to a dark stain spreading across the ceiling. "I don't know. Years, maybe." He wrote something down. "And the wiring in the East Wing? Original. From the 1920s. More notes. More problems. More evidence that the perfect house was rotting from the inside out." By the time he finished, I had a list 3 pages long of code violations that needed immediate attention. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that would condemn the building. But enough to prove that my family had been so busy maintaining appearances that they'd forgotten to maintain the actual structure. The bank representative came next. A woman named Carol with kind eyes and bad news. 3 mortgages, she said, spreading papers across the dining table. All taken out within the last 5 years. The payments have been irregular at best. And there are several credit lines tied to the property that are maxed out. How much total? She told me a number that made my vision blur. Debt stacked on more debt. My family had been playing financial Jenga, pulling out pieces and hoping the tower wouldn't fall. "What are my options?" I asked. Carol looked at me with something like pity. "Honestly, without significant capital, you're looking at foreclosure within 60 days. Unless what? Unless you can prove the property has value beyond its current state. Historical significance. Community benefit. Something that would make restructuring the debt worthwhile for the bank." I thought about my grandmother. About her letter. About the reading room she'd always talked about building but never had time for. What if I turned part of it into a nonprofit? Educational programs. Community resources. Carol's eyebrows lifted. That could work. If you can show a solid plan. Real commitment. Not just promises. I spent the rest of the day making calls. To the charity bookstore where I'd worked. To the local library. to teachers and community organizers who'd been trying to find space for after-school programs. People who actually cared about doing good instead of looking good. By evening, I had the skeleton of a plan. Turn the music room into a reading space. Open the library for tutoring programs. Use the grounds for community gardens. Transform the monument into something alive. But plans need money. And I just kicked out my only family. My phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. Miss Vale. A man's voice, professional and careful. This is Richard Osman from Osman and Associates. We're the trustees managing your grandmother's estate. My heart stopped. Yes. We've been watching the situation with your family, the financial records, the foreclosure notices, and we've reviewed the codicil in your grandmother's will. I couldn't breathe. And we'd like to meet with you tomorrow. There are some things we need to discuss about the estate's future. He hung up before I could ask what he meant. I didn't sleep that night. I walked through the empty house, listening to it settle and creak. Every room felt different without them. Bigger. Quieter. Like the house itself was taking its first real breath in years. In my grandmother's study, I found more letters. Ones she'd never sent. One was addressed to my mother, dated 5 years ago. You're spending love like it's money and money like it's infinite. One day you'll discover neither works that way. I hope someone will be there to catch you when you fall. She'd known. She'd seen it all coming. The trustee's office was downtown in a building made of glass and steel. Richard Osman met me in a conference room with windows that overlooked the entire city. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he began. She spent 30 years building wealth, and she was very specific about how it should be used after her death. I read the will. You read part of it, the public part. But there was another provision, one that would only activate under certain conditions. He slid a folder across the table. Your grandmother established a secondary trust, a substantial one. It was designed to be released to a designated steward if the primary heirs proved themselves. He paused, choosing his words carefully, unfit to manage her legacy responsibly. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Numbers. Accounts. Assets I'd never known existed. She left this for whoever would protect her values. Not her reputation. Her actual values. Community. Education. Responsibility. He looked at me directly. We've been watching you, Miss Vale. We've seen the inspector's report. The restructuring proposal. The calls you've been making to community organizations. You've been watching me? It's our job. And based on what we've observed, we believe you're the steward she hoped would emerge. He pointed to a line in the document. This trust contains enough to save the house, to fund your nonprofit, to turn her legacy into something that actually helps people. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was saying. But there's a condition, he continued. The trust can only be used for community benefit, not personal gain, not family bailouts. And if at any point we determine you're misusing the funds, they revert to charity. Permanently. I understand.
Do you?
Because your family will come back. They'll ask for help. For forgiveness. For one more chance. And you'll have to say no. Over and over again.
Can you do that?
I thought about 15 hours. About watching them drive away. About choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Yes, I said. I can. Richard smiled for the first time. Then let's talk about how to save your grandmother's house. If you suddenly had the power to help your family, but only if you stayed firm with your boundaries, could you do it? Comment below. The news spread through our social circle like wildfire through dry grass. The Vale family, perfect, polished, powerful, had imploded. The daughter nobody paid attention to had somehow taken control. And worse, she was turning their precious estate into a charity project. The phone started ringing. First my mother's friends, trying to get information. Then reporters from the local society pages, sniffing for scandal. Then my mother herself, her voice shaking with something between rage and desperation. How could you do this? She screamed through the phone. Everything we built. Everything we worked for. You've destroyed it. No, I said calmly. I'm saving it. You destroyed it. I'm just cleaning up the mess. The trust fund, Rowan, that money was supposed to be for family. It's being used for family, just not ours. She hung up on me. Called back 10 minutes later. Hung up again.
Called back.
It became a pattern. Anger, then pleading, then threats, then silence. Then the cycle would start over. My father tried a different approach. He showed up at the house 3 days after the trustee meeting, standing on the porch in a suit that looked less pressed than before. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in. We sat in the living room where he'd hosted 1,000 networking events, and now it was just us in furniture that suddenly looked too big. "I made mistakes," he said. "I know that. Your mother and we got caught up in maintaining an image. We forgot what actually mattered. You forgot I was a person, not a bank account." He flinched. "You're right. And I'm sorry. But Rowan, we're family. Surely there's a way we can work this out. The trust money, if you have access to it, you could help us get back on our feet. We wouldn't need much. Just enough to."
No.
You didn't even let me finish. Because I already know where this goes. You want money to restart the same lifestyle that buried you in the first place. And when that money runs out, you'll need more. And more. Until there's nothing left. His jaw tightened. "So, you're just going to abandon us?" "I'm going to stop enabling you. There's a difference." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "You're making a mistake. Family is supposed to stick together. Family is also supposed to love each other, not just use each other." He left without another word. But I knew he'd be back. They all would be. Sienna's approach was more calculated. She didn't call or visit. Instead, she launched a social media campaign that painted me as the villain in her fairy tale. Posts about betrayal, about how families should support each other, about a sister who turned her back during a time of need. She never mentioned the debt or the lies or the years of treating me like hired help. She just posted beautiful photos from the old days with captions about broken promises and shattered dreams. Her friends flooded the comments with support. Strangers who didn't know the real story called me heartless. Cold. A trust fund kid who didn't understand real struggle. For a week, I watched my name get dragged through digital mud. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I'd hoped somewhere deep down that they'd understand. That they'd eventually see what I was trying to do. But understanding requires humility. And my family had built their entire identity on never admitting fault. Then something unexpected happened. A local journalist, one who actually did research instead of just recycling gossip, published an article titled "The Veil Estate, A Family Reconfigured." She'd done the digging. Found the foreclosure notices. Interviewed vendors who hadn't been paid. Talked to the trustee about the nonprofit plans. The article painted a different picture. Not of a cruel daughter, but of a family that had been living a lie and one person brave enough to tell the truth. The comment section exploded. Half the people praised me for having boundaries. The other half called me every name imaginable. But at least the real story was out there. Sienna deleted all her posts the next day. Went radio silent. Her fiancé, the one who'd proposed with a ring bought on credit, quietly ended the engagement. Apparently love has a price point, and financial honesty wasn't included in his budget. My mother sent me a single text message. "You've humiliated us." I didn't respond. What was there to say? They'd humiliated themselves. I'd just stopped covering it up. But the hardest call came from someone I didn't expect. My cousin Rachel, who I'd always liked but rarely saw. She was the family member who'd moved away and built her own quiet life. "I read the article," she said. "And I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Those 4 words made me cry harder than anything else had. Because they meant someone understood. Someone saw what this actually cost. "It's been awful," I admitted. "I know. I went through something similar with my parents. Different details, same pattern. They wanted me to fund their retirement while I was drowning in student loans." "What did you do?" Said no. Got disowned for about 3 years. Then one day my dad called and apologized. Really apologized. It took losing everything for him to see what mattered. Do you think that'll happen with mine? Rachel was quiet for a moment. Maybe. But even if it doesn't, you're doing the right thing. Grandma Arlette would be so proud. After he hung up, I sat in the silence and let myself feel everything I'd been pushing down. The grief, the anger, the relief, the loneliness of being right when everyone wants you to be wrong. The house felt huge around me, empty, but also clean in a way it never had been before. I opened my laptop and started working on the nonprofit proposal. Real work. Not just dreams on paper, but actual plans with budgets and timelines and measurable goals. The reading room would open in 3 months. After-school programs would start in 6. Community gardens by next spring. My grandmother's money, the money my family thought was theirs by right, would feed families and teach kids and create opportunities for people who actually needed them. That night, as I was locking up, I found another letter from my grandmother. This one was tucked inside a book on the shelf, like she'd known I'd eventually need to read it. "Dear Rowan," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've made the hard choice. The one that feels like you're tearing your own heart out. I'm sorry it had to be you, but I'm grateful it was you. Because you're strong enough to do what's right even when it's lonely. Even when they hate you for it. The trust isn't just money. It's a test. Use it wisely. And remember, stewardship is about protecting what matters, not what's popular. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm watching. Always. Grandma." I folded the letter carefully and added it to the collection in my desk drawer. A drawer full of words from the one person who'd seen me clearly. Outside, the estate looked peaceful in the moonlight. No cars in the driveway. No parties on the lawn. Just a house settling into its new purpose. Tomorrow the contractors would start fixing the violations. Next week the nonprofit paperwork would be filed. And somewhere in the mess of it all, I'd figure out how to turn a monument to vanity into something that actually mattered. But tonight, I just stood in the quiet and breathed. Have you ever been called the villain for doing the right thing? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. The wedding that was supposed to happen never did. I found out through a cousin's Instagram story. Sienna's standing in front of a closed bridal boutique, her face carefully composed but her eyes red. The caption read, "Sometimes dreams change." No mention of the canceled venue, the deposits lost, the magazine feature that would never happen. Just a vague post about pivoting and growth and finding yourself. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the smile she'd worn while they demanded I empty my bank account. The way she'd sat there and let them weaponize duty against me. And the sympathy dried up before it could fully form. The social fallout continued for weeks. People chose sides like they were picking teams for dodgeball. Some of our old family friends stopped speaking to me. Others quietly reached out with messages like, "I always knew something was off," or "Good for you for standing up for yourself." The ones who stayed silent were the most telling. They knew the truth, but didn't want to risk their own social standing by acknowledging it. My father's business connections started to evaporate. Turns out when people realize you've been living on borrowed money and borrowed time, they stop trusting you with theirs. Projects fell through. Partnerships dissolved. The network he'd spent decades building crumbled like wet paper. My mother had to get a job. Actual work. She ended up at an upscale boutique selling clothes to women who used to be her peers. I heard about it through the grapevine. How she'd been spotted folding sweaters, how she'd aged 10 years in 2 months, how she'd started parking 3 blocks away so no one would see her car. Sienna moved to another state. Arizona, someone said. Or maybe Nevada. Somewhere far from the wreckage of her perfect life. She deleted most of her social media and started over with a private account under a different name. They scattered like seeds in the wind, trying to plant themselves somewhere new where nobody knew the Vale name or what it had become. And I stayed, in the house, with the memories and the repairs and the slow work of transformation. The contractors found more problems as they worked. Termites in the West Wing, mold behind the wallpaper in the library, a foundation crack that had been hidden behind expensive paintings. Every discovery was another reminder that beauty built on lies eventually collapses. But we fixed it.
Slowly. Carefully.
One problem at a time. The reading room opened on a Saturday morning in October. I'd sent invitations to local schools, community centers, the library. I didn't know if anyone would show up. 50 people came. Families with kids who'd never had access to books like these. Teachers who'd been running programs out of church basements. Teenagers who needed somewhere safe to study after school. I gave a short speech about my grandmother, about her belief in usefulness over decoration, about turning privilege into purpose. My voice shook, but I got through it. A little girl with braids and a backpack raised her hand after. "Is this really free?" she asked. "Really free," I told her. She smiled, so wide I thought her face might split. Then she grabbed a book and curled up in one of the reading chairs like she'd been waiting her whole life for that exact spot. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right choice. Over the next few months, the programs grew. More kids showed up. More volunteers offered help. The community gardens got planted. The tutoring sessions filled up with a waiting list. The house stopped being a museum and became something alive. Laughter echoed in rooms that used to hold only tension. The kitchen fed people who were actually hungry instead of just socially performing. But the healing wasn't all external. One winter evening, my phone rang. My father's number. "Rowan," he said. His voice sounded different.
Smaller.
"Can I come over?" "Why?" "Because I owe you an apology. A real one." I almost said no, but curiosity won. "Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. He showed up with a pie. Homemade, not bought. Apple cinnamon, which he somehow remembered was my favorite. "I've been going to therapy," he said as we sat in the kitchen. "Your mother too. We're trying to figure out how we got so lost. And we were wrong. About everything. About money. About family.
About you."
He pushed the pie toward me. "This doesn't fix anything. I know that. But I wanted you to know we're trying. We're actually trying." I cut 2 slices. We ate in silence for a while. "The house looks different," he said finally. "Good different. It's being used the way it was supposed to be." He nodded. "Grandma would love this. She always said we cared more about looking successful than being useful." She was right.
Yeah.
He finished his pie. "I don't expect forgiveness. Or even a relationship. But I wanted you to know. We're working on ourselves. And we're sorry. Really, truly sorry." After he left, I sat with that apology. Turned it over in my mind like a stone. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt. But it was something. A beginning, maybe. 3 weeks later, Sienna sent an email. No subject line. Just a message. "I got a job.
Real job.
Office work. It's weird and I'm bad at it, but I'm learning. My therapist says I built my whole identity around being perfect, and now I have to figure out who I am when I'm not. It's terrifying. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know I'm trying to change.
S."
I read it 5 times. Then I wrote back, "Good luck. I mean that." She responded with a single word. "Thanks." It wasn't reconciliation. But it wasn't war either. It was something in between. Something honest. My mother never apologized directly. But one Sunday, I found a card in the mail. No return address. Inside, in her handwriting, "I'm learning that love isn't about controlling people. I wish I'd learned that sooner. I hope you're well." Small steps. Tiny movements toward something better. The estate continued to transform. We added a community kitchen. Started offering classes on financial literacy, ironic but important. Created scholarships for kids who needed help with college applications. And slowly, quietly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years.
Peace.
Not the fake kind that comes from avoiding conflict. The real kind that comes from doing hard things and surviving them. Have you ever watched someone hit rock bottom before they could finally change? Comment below. Transformation stories matter. Spring came to the estate like a promise being kept. The gardens we'd planted bloomed in unexpected colors. The reading room had a waiting list for Saturday story time. The community kitchen smelled like bread and hope every morning. I walked through it all feeling like a stranger in the best possible way. This place that had been a prison of expectations was becoming something I'd never imagined, a home that belonged to everyone. The local paper did a follow-up story. Same journalist who'd written the first honest piece. She interviewed the kids who came for tutoring, the families who used the gardens, the volunteers who'd made it all possible. The headline read, "From Privilege to Purpose: How One Woman Chose Community Over Legacy." My phone buzzed with messages. Some supportive. Some still critical. A few from people I'd written off who admitted they'd been wrong about me. But the one that mattered most came from an unknown number. Read the article. The reading room is named after our grandmother. I cried. In a good way. Maybe I could visit sometime? Sienna. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no. To keep the boundary I'd fought so hard to establish. To protect the peace I'd built. But another part, the part that sounded like my grandmother, whispered that reconciliation isn't the same as enabling. That people can change if you give them space to do it. I texted back. Coffee first. Neutral territory. Then we'll see. Deal. We met at a cafe downtown 2 weeks later. Sienna looked different. Her hair was simpler. Her clothes were nice, but not designer. She wore less makeup and more honesty in her expression. I almost didn't come, she admitted, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Why did you? Because I'm tired of running from what I did. From who I was. She finally looked at me. I treated you like garbage. For years. I let them treat you worse. And I smiled while doing it because I was too scared to be anything other than perfect. What changed? Losing everything. Turns out when you build your entire identity on other people's approval, and then those people disappear, you're left with nothing. No personality. No skills. No idea who you actually are. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures. A small apartment. A desk with a computer. A certificate from a community college class. I'm studying accounting, she said with a self-deprecating laugh.
Me.
The girl who never balanced a checkbook in her life. But I'm learning. And I'm paying my own rent. With money I actually earned. I'm proud of you, I said. And I meant it. Don't be. Not yet. I'm still figuring out how to be a person instead of a performance. She set her phone down. But I wanted you to know I'm trying. And I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not the fake kind where I'm just trying to get something from you. Apology accepted. Her eyes filled with tears. Just like that. Just like that. But Sienna, we can't go back to how things were. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. I know. And honestly, I don't want to go back. That life was exhausting. She wiped her eyes. Can we go forward instead? Slowly. Like strangers becoming friends. Yeah, I said. We can do that. We talked for 2 hours. About therapy and growth and the painful work of becoming better people. About our parents and their slow progress. About the estate and what it had become. I'd like to volunteer, she said as we were leaving. At the reading room. If you'll have me. You're serious? I'm good with kids. Or I used to be before I got so wrapped up in myself. And I'd like to give back. Even if it's just reading picture books on Saturday mornings. I thought about it. About trust and boundaries and second chances. Trial basis. 1 month. If it works, we'll talk about extending. She nodded. That's fair. We hugged goodbye. Awkward and brief, but real. As I walked back to my car, I thought about my grandmother's letter. About stewardship and protection, and the slow work of rebuilding what was broken. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I gave them 15 hours to leave. It was messier. More complicated. Less triumphant and more human. But maybe that was the point. Quiet justice wasn't about destroying people. It was about stopping the patterns that destroy. It was about creating space for people to become better if they chose to. Some would choose it. Some wouldn't. But I'd done my part. I'd protected what mattered. I'd turned wealth into usefulness. I'd honored my grandmother's legacy by refusing to let it be wasted on appearances. The estate continued to grow. More programs. More impact. More lives changed in small, meaningful ways. My parents started visiting occasionally. Tentative. Humble. They'd ask if they could help with events. volunteer in the gardens, make themselves useful instead of decorative. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still hard. Some conversations still hurt. But we were learning, all of us, how to be family without performance, how to love without leverage, how to show up honestly instead of perfectly. And in the quiet moments, when the house was full of laughter and purpose, I'd think about that dinner table, about the moment I stood up and said 15 hours. It had felt like an ending, but really it was a beginning. Have you ever had to destroy something to save it? Share your story below. 1 year after I gave them 15 hours to leave, I stood at the same dining table where it all fell apart. But everything was different now. The table held notebooks instead of fancy plates, volunteers instead of family performing for each other, people planning literacy programs and community events instead of social climbing strategies. The chandelier still hung overhead, but it lit up real work instead of empty appearances. I'd spent the morning showing a group of donors around the estate. They wanted to fund an expansion, more classrooms, a computer lab, maybe a small cafe where people could gather. Your grandmother would be proud, one of them said. I smiled. She planned this. I just followed her instructions. After they left, I found myself alone in my grandmother's old study. Her books still lined the shelves. Her letters still lived in my desk drawer. But now the room was also filled with binders of program results, budget spreadsheets, volunteer schedules. Usefulness and memory living side by side. My phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. Story time was chaos today. Kid threw up on my shoes. I've never been happier. See you next week. Another from my father. Your mother made too much soup. Can we drop some by the community kitchen? Another from Rachel. Just saw the news feature. You're changing lives. Keep going. I looked around at the life I'd built from the rubble of what came before. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I was younger. It wasn't the fairy tale my family had tried to script. It was better, because it was real, built on truth instead of image, on boundaries instead of obligation, on purpose instead of performance. The doorbell rang. I walked through the house, past the reading room where kids were sprawled with books, past the kitchen where volunteers were prepping tomorrow's cooking class, past the community board covered in thank you notes and drawings. A young woman stood on the porch. She looked nervous, holding a folder. I'm sorry to just show up, she said. But I read about what you're doing here. And she paused, gathering courage. My family is like yours was. All image, no substance. And I don't know how to get out. I don't know how to say no without losing everything. I looked at her and saw myself 3 years ago.
Scared.
Alone. Trying to find the courage to draw a line.
Come in, I said.
Let's talk. We sat in the living room, and I told her the truth. Not the social media version. Not the heroic story. The real one. About the fear and the doubt, and the lonely nights wondering if I'd made the right choice. But here's what I learned. I finished. Boundaries feel like cruelty at first, especially to people who've never had to respect them. But they're not cruelty. They're clarity. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop participating in someone else's destruction. She wiped her eyes. What if they never forgive me? Then they never forgive you. But you'll forgive yourself. And that matters more. She left an hour later with resources, phone numbers, and a plan. And I felt my grandmother's presence, like a hand on my shoulder. This was the legacy she'd wanted. Not money preserved in a vault, but wisdom passed forward. Strength multiplied through honesty. That evening, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled out all the letters my grandmother had left. The sent ones. The unsent ones. The ones hidden in books throughout the house. I read them all in order, and together they formed a message. Wealth is nothing without purpose. Family is nothing without honesty. And legacy is nothing if it doesn't serve the living. She'd known exactly what would happen. She'd seen the patterns repeating. And she'd built in protections, not to punish, but to redirect. To take what was being wasted and transform it into something worthy. I was just the steward. The one brave enough or stubborn enough to do what needed doing. As the sun set over the estate, I walked the grounds one more time. The gardens were thriving. The building was sound. The programs were changing lives. And somewhere my grandmother was smiling. Because this, all of this, was what she'd meant by usefulness. Not the transactional kind where you're valued for what you provide. The transformational kind where you create space for others to grow. My phone buzzed one last time. My mother, thank you for not giving up on us. Even when we'd given up on ourselves. I didn't respond right away. Just sat with the words. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't erase the hurt, doesn't rewrite history, but it does open a door to something new. Something that might, with time and work, look like family. Not the performative kind, the real kind, built on honesty and boundaries and the understanding that love means showing up truthfully, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I stood at that same dining table one more time. The place where I'd given them 15 hours. The place where everything ended and began. And I thought about what I'd tell my grandmother if I could talk to her now. I'd tell her I understood. That stewardship isn't about ownership, it's about protection. That quiet justice isn't about revenge, it's about stopping the harm. That the best way to honor a legacy is to make it useful instead of decorative. I'd tell her that I stayed, that I rebuilt, that I turned the house into a home that matters. And I'd tell her that yes, it hurt, but it was worth it, because dignity isn't for sale. Not mine, not anyone's. And that, in the end, is the only story worth telling. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share stories about courage, boundaries, and choosing yourself even when it's hard. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone who needs it today. Share this video with someone fighting to find their own voice. And remember, quiet justice isn't about being loud. It's about being firm. It's about protecting what matters, even when everyone else wants you to pretend. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and never apologize for setting boundaries that protect your peace.